It's mailbag time as you get ready for week 3 in the NFL. Tons of questions on Bryce Young. What does it mean for the young man's career? What should the Panthers do about Bryce Young? What about the quarterback situation now in Miami with Tua going on IR? Could there be a deal between the two of those teams? All that and more coming up on today's Peacock and Williamson mailbag.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look at the NFL on the field and in the front office with elite breakdowns to next-level analysis and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. That's where most of the questions came for today's mailbag on Twitter. You can always drop a question there or in the YouTube comments. Make sure you subscribe while you are there. And of course, you can subscribe everywhere you are listening to this podcast. Appreciate all of our everydayers out there making this your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code, all lowercase, LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. That is prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. All right. One of the big news stories of the week, Matt, is that Bryce Young has been benched 18 games into his NFL career. Andy Dalton, we'll talk about that game tomorrow with the Carolina Panthers as we make our picks, is now the starter for some time. Will it be one game? Will it be half of one game? Will it be for the rest of the season, Matt, is a big question. I think we have to start with, and we got multiple questions, so we're going to put them all together here, and we appreciate all the questions we get from our listeners. The first one, Matt, is what's the plan with Bryce Young now for the Panthers? Is he done? Does he come back from this? Does he just need to sit and watch? And yeah, let's start there. What does this mean for Bryce Young immediately?
Well, for the team, I think it's let's evaluate the rest of the team because he didn't allow us to do that. And let's try to at least see if we can be competitive with these other 10 men. You know, I mean, can we hang with the Raiders? I think they're playing this week, you know, or are we just going to get blown out by everyone in the NFL because there's nobody good enough on our roster to even play football anymore? You know, like the Deontay Johnsons of the world and the guards and that type of thing. Like Young, if you watch that game, he's like throwing jump passes. Like he looks like a little kid playing with adults and has no confidence. The stuff he did well at Bama is just thrown right out the door, anticipation, things like that, and no confidence. So I think it's a move that had to be made. But I've thought this for a long time, and I like how you've laid it out too, that just because we bench someone, does that mean we hate them and they never can go back in the game because they're young? You know, like the whole Drake May Brissett conversation. If you put May in week 1 and he stinks, you pull him out, then it's all over. You know, like
Right.
it doesn't have to be that way, does it? It might be with him, but I'm just don't quite get that philosophy.
The right path for development, so the rest of the team can settle down. You get a chance to look at everybody else. Does it look just as terrible, and you realize it's not because of the quarterback at all? Does it all of a sudden start to look awesome? You go like, well, wait a second, now we have to kind of keep this other quarterback in because we're actually winning games, and maybe our team isn't as bad as it looked before. And I think
you need to get that answer
right. And so
we don't know if Andy Dalton's still good, and I assume he's okay.
Right, that's true, and it is good for young quarterbacks to sit and watch a little bit, and it's probably not the worst thing for them to play a little bit, sit and watch their own film, watch the film of the veteran again, then go back out there. And
like
quarterbacks can't do that.
I haven't even looked at the spread, but I'm strongly considering taking Carolina plus whatever they're getting, just because I do think it's almost all because of the quarterback. Not that they're good or even can resemble mediocrity with Dalton, but he was an anchor. I mean, just his way he was playing didn't allow for anything. I mean, I'm not saying it's all him, but it's a lot.
If he looks that bad compared to a veteran like Andy Dalton, this brings me to Joey Bag of Donuts' question. Why was Bryce Young drafted so high in the first place?
Now, of course, there is some Monday morning quarterbacking here. But I really, really, really had a problem when he was coming out with his size. And I think things I said were, he may be fine in year 1, he might be fine in year 2, but I want to see him through the rigors of the season, the rigors of a career. You know he's going to deal with injuries at some point, and I still think it's a big man's game. But what he did well at Bama, and the other thing, I mean, he's a total outlier. Like, I think we have to address that. I mean, I had a problem taking Baker Mayfield first overall, just because he's not the prototypical first overall 6'5", 200 Josh Allen looking dude, you know, with a monster arm and great athleticism. And, you know, Baker doesn't have a superpower. And Bryce Young's superpower was, I guess, anticipation, seeing the field, but it's not nearly as good as like Caleb Williams in terms of like playmaking and seeing the field. And I thought Young was kind of a below average athlete by today's standards, you know, speed, strength, agility. The arm's not great, and he's tiny, you know.
And you and I both thought it was like, oh my gosh, the Bears are doing backflips because they got this offer from the Panthers, and we thought it was a great move for the Bears, maybe not a great move for the Panthers.
Yeah.
To put all their eggs in that basket because of,
and we had a lot of field doubts at the time still, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. And it whether or not you thought he was number one, trading up for him on top of it, we were both not on board with that deal. We didn't think it really was the right move for the Panthers. A little much, felt panicky. And for being such an outlier with size, and then on top of that, it wasn't like he was Kyler Murray athletically.
No.
He was an outlier with size. He didn't have this huge arm, but he had a good arm and he can make some plays, and, you know, it was a decent athlete. But there was like, man, what he's got, you have to hit this 100% and even him outplay how good you think he is from the neck up for this to be the right move. And that's so hard. And we haven't seen that from him so far in the NFL.
No, I mean, not even a little. And now I guess what he did best, I would say, would be in his mind, his processing. There's obviously toughness there, but that looks shot. I mean, and even I don't see arm strength throws this year at all. I don't see any. He looks like a little player out there.
Oh, he looks tiny. He looks like some little brother or one of the coach's kids got a jersey on and is running around. That's how small he is. It's not tight. It's stature too. So there's just so many ways it could go wrong.
And he plays that little. I apologize for interrupting. You know, Russell Wilson and Murray don't play like little people, you know?
Right. And I'm actually I want to go back because I don't want this to be all hindsight stuff. But there a lot of these things we were saying at the time. And I think my thing was, it's going to be so obvious if he's not good in a couple of years. And we're like, of course, like, are you crazy? You traded up for a guy.
Of course he wasn't good. Right.
An outlier who's 5'9", 180 pounds. Never expect that to work.
He better run a 4.2. You know, not even be like a pretty good athlete or Kyler like athlete. He better be like the most athletic guy we've ever seen with a monster arm.
So more questions on this. I want to go next to Michael. He says, even if the we're going to go into the future, then we're going to come back to the current. He says, even if the Panthers draft a quarterback at the top of round 1 in 2025, how would you assess their nest for a young QB? And I think Michael's getting at some of the other moves that have put them where they are. Sure, it would be nice to have Christian McCaffrey or DJ Moore or Marvin Harrison Jr. or Brian Burns or the 9th pick from last year. But I digress, Michael says. So he's pointing at the Panthers to say, not even if you have a chance to get a different quarterback. Well, guess what? You ruined your nest for that next quarterback because of all the moves you made to get this quarterback.
Yes, I think it's a really bad organization that's made a lot of bad decisions that would look a lot different if maybe they just kept their own, or, you know, like he's implying, like, who are you comfortable with him playing with? Like, we even talked about the defense. I think the defense is simply hideous, and especially after Derek Brown got hurt. I mean, I see 3 to 5 guys that I'm building around, none of whom are Micah Parsons or Andrew Thomas or some great tackle or some Marvin Harrison Jr. You know what I mean? Like, if Deontay walks, all right. You know, I mean, the guards they overpaid for. All right, maybe the Brooks is a good young back, but we'll see. You know, I think it's a terrible nest, and that's part of why. I mean, if Young was in Houston, it would look better than this.
Yes, I agree. So everything's working against itself here with Bryce Young. Last quick note: do you think he starts again this year?
Yes. Would you consider trading for him?
Well, that's our next topic. That's a perfect.
Okay.
I want to talk about the Miami Dolphins, and there's some ideas about what the Dolphins need to do at quarterback. It's not the disaster that the Panthers are right now, but they could be in trouble without their starting quarterback, who's officially been put on the IR. So Tua's out for until week 8 now. So we'll get into that. Could the plan be for the Miami Dolphins? And a whole lot more from the Peacock and Williamson mailbag next. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson brought to you by one of our newest sponsors, Arena Club. For most of us, if you like collecting cards, the idea of spending maybe $2,000 or more on a Luka or an Ellie or a Mahomes rookie card. You got any of those Mahomes rookie cards, by the way, Matt?
I wish, man. I wish I had a whole bunch of them.
I mean, sometimes, paying for a card like that just isn't in the cards. And if you love collecting, it's some serious money to drop, even if you're way into it. So thanks to slab packs from arenaclub.com, now it's possible to score gem mints for a fraction of their retail price. Every card that I just talked about there was a hit from last week's Arena Club slab pack drop. Arena Club is the only repack that provides real value, a complete view of all possible cards, and clear hit rates for each one, which is very key. Arena Club slab packs are revolutionizing the repack game with transparency. After your pulls are revealed, they'll immediately be placed in your showroom for safekeeping, selling, trading, or auction. The Arena Club grading process is accurate, fast, and transparent, with a full grade rationale provided and explanation of how your card was scored. So right now, you can get 10% off your first slab pack or card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL. That's arenaclub.com/LockedOnNFL, code LockedOnNFL for 10% off your first purchase. So Miami Dolphins have a quarterback issue of their own. It's not quite as bad of a situation as it is for Bryce Young and the Carolina Panthers, a much better team around Tua. And now Skylar Thompson is going to start this week. But you might have to start making plans if you're the Dolphins. And you might have to start making plans before Tua makes his own plans, if that makes sense. Because Tua, there's a lot of ways it could go. He could come back and play this year after 4 weeks of IR. He could sit out the rest of this year, come back next year. He could retire completely and never play again. And a lot of people want him to do that for his own well-being. Mike McDaniel said he's not going to presume anything and, is not going to put that on the young man. Is just worried about his health, and that's where the organization stands. But they're trying to be in a playoff team this year. They're trying to be a playoff team going forward as well. So what should that plan be? And it's probably not just, we'll see what's going on with Skylar Thompson, and that's it. So do you
pick up Huntley?
Yeah,
who I think is a terrible fit, to be honest.
He's a guy, but he's one of the few cheap options available just because you need a body. You need to fill a roster spot.
Snagged him off a practice squad. I mean,
right.
I think he's an okay backup, but I think he's a terrible fit for that quick hitting. We talked about superpowers. Two is his processing. Boom, ball comes out. That's not Huntley at all.
Is there a better fit for Bryce Young's skill set than Miami? Should the Miami Dolphins call the Carolina Panthers?
Of course, what complicates this, though, is money. They just gave Tua a huge contract. Like, how much can you have invested in your quarterback room? But not having a quarterback also isn't the answer. I mean, the show must go on. There is going to be a game this week, and you can't just roll out what you got. Unless they're higher on Skylar Thompson than I am. I think he's a bad 2 and, maybe more of a 3. I don't have a great idea. I mean, I think it was Coach Lamers asked us something about Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah, what about Jimmy G? And Jimmy,
that's interesting.
Coincidentally, his suspension just ended, right? It was a 2-game.
I think so.
So he's back in week 3. I don't know how the Rams feel about Stetson Bennett as being the backup. The Rams season's slipping away very quickly. If they go 0-3, do they start to say, well, we got to take offers for anybody right now because this season's not going well. We got a question about the Rams here upcoming as well, but Jimmy Garoppolo with his old offensive coordinator, Mike McDaniel.
Yeah, I mean,
he's getting the ball out quick. I think it's a fantastic fit.
Yeah, he wouldn't cost you much. I mean, he's making veteran money, but not insane money. He wouldn't cost you a super high draft pick. If I'm the Rams, I think the writing's on the wall that this isn't our year and we need picks. I would be very open to moving him. I I didn't see the other Rams question, but I actually threw this out on another outlet yesterday. Could Stafford move at the trade deadline? You know what I mean? Like if they're destined for a top 5 or 8 pick, is it time to totally redo the whole thing in LA?
That's kind of what Josh is getting to in the mailbag. He says, with injuries mounting for the Rams, is this the season that it all crashes down to earth and they end up drafting, in the top 8? And that could happen with them trying and not tanking. That could be them trying to win and still end up with the top 10 pick if they continue with all these injuries, because it's just there's just not enough talent, I think, there when you have all these injuries mounted up for the Los Angeles Rams. So maybe this is time for the Rams too. What about the Rams taking? I've heard people say that maybe the Rams should trade Matthew Stafford, and a team like the Raiders should be calling the Rams about getting a quarterback.
I mean, I think Stafford, the path we're down at his age, could be someone maybe you could pry away.
Let's say the Rams, it's as bad as possible and they're 0-7.
Yeah.
Before the deadline. You almost have to trade Stafford. Trade him and start this thing over. Get the number 1 pick, because you don't want to accidentally win a bunch of games at the end of the year. Go get the number 1 pick.
And by that token, Garoppolo can go.
Garoppolo can go anyway.
I would go anyway, right?
If I'm the Rams and I could get anything for Garoppolo right now today, maybe a player to help my depleted roster or a draft pick,
5th round pick.
I mean, how's the season going to go if? Who cares if it's Stetson Bennett or Garoppolo playing for you? I would trade Garoppolo today if the Dolphins called me.
Me too. And I think I would call you.
So let's do it.
That's the best name I can come up with. I mean, that's better than like all the Case Keenum types out there. I know I always lump him in together, but like all the Chase Daniels types, like there's always those lifetime. How about like Mills from Houston, or I don't think
that's not bad. That's not bad.
That's not bad.
Coached with, with McDaniels in the Shanahan scheme. So,
but if I'm Houston and I don't want to lose Stroud for a day and not have my backup,
he's cheap for you, so it would cost something. You would have to be okay. Well, give me something worth trading this guy for, because he's perfect. He's a perfect player for what we need him to be: cheap and a solid backup if something happens to our starter and we're trying to be a playoff team. Bryce Young. So bringing this back to Bryce Young, because a lot of people have said, "Oh, Bryce Young, Miami." I love the fit. That would be an off-season move. And Bryce Young to come back and play again, still look bad. You can't trade Bryce Young after so little time, and all of a sudden he looks good somewhere else. That would be the ultimate insult to injury for the Panthers with this whole situation. Is Bryce Young still ends up playing well, but for somebody else.
I was thinking about that. Like if McDaniels or McVay, when you were talking about blowing up the Rams, I'm like, well, what if you threw a late pick at Bryce Young, still lose a bunch of games, and see if you can just get anything out of him if you're McVay? And he is the answer. It's like, I think a terrible move.
Those teams, those systems, I think all those teams would be looking at Bryce Young if however that ends, if he gets cut or whatever. He's the number 1 pick, so he's not that cheap either. The later he gets into his rookie contract, so a lot of teams will probably be like, I'm not going to even trade for a guy like that, even if it's a 7th round pick, because I don't want to have that money. But
I bet he's like a Trey Lance trade when it happens,
right? Yeah,
or a Fields trade. I mean,
right,
very little,
but his contract will be even bigger than those guys were.
Right. But like if I'm the Steelers who don't have a quarterback for next year, or if I'm the Giants or the Raiders, I'm not considering Young as an option.
No, he would be he would just be let's see what we have here. If he's free and we have the cap space, then let's do it, and it'll be competitive.
Bring him to camp and see how it goes, and
which doesn't make sense you might as well just hold on to him for the Panthers for at least a little while, just to hope that it gets better.
But there are personalities involved, and he's on all the billboards, and you're a flop. And
if you draft a quarterback in the 1st round high, then you probably can't keep him around.
Yeah. I mean, he's a little different because he's a 1st overall pick, but Lance, Pickett, Jones with the Patriots, so many of those guys got traded just to kind of get him out of the building,
Well, and the big thing is not even locker room stuff. It's every question and every media outing is going to be about the quarterback, and you still want the distraction around.
Yeah, a lot of those guys that were the man or were being counted on, Fields. I mean, all those guys got traded.
And all those Shanahan tree, the McVay tree coaches, I can see all them looking at Bryce Young being like, yeah, look, I'll take a look at that guy.
Yeah. I mean, a good situation I can't come with off the top of my head is maybe if he was Stroud's backup, like someone that's no challenge whatsoever, or an 8-year veteran or 10-year veteran, Stafford's backup, like someone like that. That's maybe you're the successor, maybe, but probably not, but maybe.
Yeah, but nothing's going to happen with Bryce Young, at least until the offseason at the earliest, I'm sure. And I think he's going to play again this year for the Carolina Panthers before any decisions like that are made. You 2 games into his second year and you trade him and he looks exactly like Tua in Miami or something. I mean, you can't do that.
And back to the Dolphins, I'm not seeing a great option that's going to save their season, but I would call about Jimmy.
Hey, Jimmy G will get you to the Super Bowl.
How about Tannehill? I don't know if he can go back to Miami.
The first thing that always comes up, and I'm just like, I don't know.
All right.
Tannehill doesn't do much for me.
I think he might be shot.
He might have been a better move for the Packers, and the Packers didn't do anything. And they have plenty of time to do something. So, by the way, is this Matt LaFleur's best coaching job so far? A W after your starting quarterback goes down? More from the Peacock and Williamson mailbag next. This episode of Peacock and Williamson brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And, of course, there's a reason why they're America's #1 sports book, because they've all got all the best lines and all the best sports and all the best action. Every weekly football matchup you can find at FanDuel. Tons of prop bets. You want to bet on rookie, offensive, defensive rookies of the year. You want to bet on who's going to win the next Super Bowl. You want to bet on coach of the year. You want any number of prop bets on trades, places where people are going to land, win totals, NFL draft props, all of it. And of course, every other sport imaginable at FanDuel. And a little something different for our listeners now through September 22nd. All FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. That is FanDuel.com. Let's go to a question about Matt LaFleur here. Is this potentially his best coaching job? And this from Josh about last week. Was this last week Matt LaFleur's best coaching job since arriving in Green Bay? Will he ever get national recognition for how good of a coach he is without winning a Super Bowl?
I think he's starting to, but it's still too slow in terms of national recognition. And I would hate to put together a top, a power ranking of coach. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing it, that I'm, know what I'm talking about, because I'm not behind the scenes with every one of them. But he'd be really high on my list. I mean, he'd be 6, 7, something like that. And the success he's had post Rodgers, as well as frankly dealing with Rodgers as well as he did, I think has a lot of weight. And this past week was incredible.
Well, and to see what he did with Jordan Love and that development and the young offense he had, and winning all those games with Rodgers, he wasn't going to get the recognition because you have a Hall of Fame quarterback and an MVP caliber quarterback. But as that fell apart, and then you transition to a new quarterback and the team's still just as good in that young offense, and then you lose that quarterback, and then you win a game with Malik Willis. It's like, you said 6 or 7.
Yeah.
It'd be tough for me to find 3 or 4 that I'd rather have than Matt LaFleur right now.
Yeah, I don't think that's crazy at all.
What's going on with the offenses around the league? Dan says, to what do you attribute the steep decline in offensive production early in seasons over the last couple of years? Do you think the gap between offensive line and defensive line talent is a primary reason? Shortened preseason, starters not playing? What do you think it is? And we got another question here about a similar topic. This one from, where is he? Steel Dog, I believe, and I can't find where Steel Dog went. Here it is. Does the lack of offensive scoring mean that refs will be encouraged to not call as many offensive fouls, not cheating, just an occasional blind eye? Scoring goes up, everybody's happy, except as always the defense.
So I think it's a huge problem, to be very honest with you. And I think that's a major issue, and I always go back to this, but maybe it's slightly changing, is defensive linemen are just more talented human beings than offensive linemen. And that's probably not going to change anytime soon. I mean, I always tell people, just watch the combine and say, Would you rather be the ones trying not to get blocked, or would you like to try to block that guy? You know, like they're all unbelievable athletes in all different shapes and sizes. I also think scoring being down is a quarterback thing for sure. Quarterback injuries in particular. I mean, when you start over the course of the last 2 years, 68 and 69 different quarterbacks, scoring is going to be down, and it's going to be ugly. And scoring is down every year in a big way since COVID. And COVID, they didn't throw many penalties. There's no one in the stadium. I think that they were worried about losing viewers. So let's keep scoring fun for the people that don't want to see games that are 9-6 and are fantasy players and things like that. But I really do believe if Roger Goodell was sitting here and we gave him truth serum, I bet he'd tell you, I'm really worried about scoring being down over and over and over. And another huge reason is just the way defenses are playing. I mean, no explosives. I mean, look at the passing yards through the first 2 weeks. There's like hardly any.
It's all the things together. Preseason is part of it for sure. Teams are starting even slower. The defensive, the shell coverages, the too deep. It's I think twice as much as it was just a couple of years ago. With how often teams
multiplying so quickly.
Keeping everything in front of you, so teams have to march down the field. Fewer explosive plays. It's also a big part of it. Mm-hmm. Teams are almost
if you match that with penalties, because most of the penalties are going to be on offense, where one hold destroys you. If I have to have a 12-play drive and not have a holding call or a illegal man downfield, it's so hard.
Well, I think there's too many penalties, so I would have no problem taking penalties.
I got some stats here for that in a minute.
All they ever do is add more penalties and make the job harder for refs, and it's just like it's ridiculous. The other thing that I didn't really think about that somebody brought up, and I think, and I wish I could give them credit because I just kind of saw it on my timeline scrolling on social media, but the level of quarterback that was playing in the league while the scoring was going crazy can't be discounted. I mean, there's no more 100%. Manning, Brady, Breeze. Rodgers is now nearing the end. Even though, Ryan years,
right? Yeah.
Philip Rivers, Ben Roethlisberger. There's going to be a logjam in the Hall of Fame with insane amount of quarterbacks. That I think there's a lot of good quarterbacks, and there's a lot of teams with a lot of talented quarterbacks, and they're doing a pretty good job replacing those guys. But man, the league was in a golden era of passing for a while, and it was just going crazier and crazier and crazier and crazier every single year. I think it was bound at some point to regress, and I think we're seeing that on top of all the other reasons.
It's a great point about the quarterbacks, because there's about a 8-year gap of guys that should be in their prime, if not beyond, slightly beyond, that were miss after miss. Jameis and Mariota and Wentz and that era. If you look at the quarterbacks drafted, the hit rate was so bad. We lose Luck. Luck would have held a lot of water for the last 5 years.
Yeah, he would be a really important bridge right now in his prime, one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And we're talking about Bryce Young now in recent drafts too. So it wasn't just one period of drafts; it's continued on. The 2021 draft with 4 out of 5 first rounders are on second teams already. Yeah, and so the league is having a tough time replacing that level of quarterback, even if they've found a number of pretty good ones in the meantime.
They almost lost a generation in there. And, even like Luck's draft class was, Griffin was RG3 was a miss, and Tannehill fell off, but Wilson was really good and then fell off a cliff, and Cousins, even that era, those guys are getting old now, but what have they done the last 2-3 years? Not enough from that class. And that's not even a terrible class,
And people talk about, okay, well, all these, too deep coverages and lighter linebackers and lighter boxes. Well, now the running game is making a comeback, and it is statistically in some ways. But at the same time, teams and defenses are telling us, so who cares? So what? They're like, yes, please run the ball against us. That's what teams are telling you. It's like, we don't care if you run the ball well, because we're allowing you to. We want to stop this thing. Yep. And it means scoring's down.
So I mentioned that my buddy did a penalty study last night. That's what I scrolled up on our text. I just want to read how insane this is. Excuse me. Last season, NFL games averaged 12.3 penalties for 98 yards. In 2022, there was 11.3 penalties, a whole penalty per game less, for 94 yards, and almost 5 yards less. This year, it's 14 penalties a game. It's almost 2 more penalties a game for 140 yards on average. The average NFL football game is 140 yards of penalties, where it was 98 the year before, 94 the year before that. That's a massive spike.
And when you think about the product of the NFL, and we were talking about Justin Herbert recently, and you're like, okay, so you're going to turn on a football game and there's going to be the same amount of Justin Herbert passing yards as penalty yards in a game. I don't know if that's necessarily the product that I want to be tuning into.
And even like J.K. Dobbins is exciting and he's playing really well, but I'd rather, he shouldn't equal Herbert's passing.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And you're right. All these, I found it crazy because it's a Steelers stat, but there was 5 teams last week that won and didn't even throw the ball 21 times. They had 20 or fewer completions. And one of them was Carr, who put up 40 some points. I get like Green Bay doing that. They were one of the teams, but the Chargers and Steelers, they threw the ball 20 times each and won.
And won too. It's
and
not
won.
Like
they all won, right?
Inept. This offense is inept. It's like, no, they won the game.
And they won. Those two aren't great offenses, but the Saints threw the ball like 16 times and put up 40 some points.
It's insane. I was shocked because everyone was talking about how good it looked with Derek Carr. And I was like, okay, I got to see Derek Carr's performance. I was like, wait, he only threw the ball 16 times.
Right.
It's crazy, but wow.
And Baker's the other one. Baker was like 16 attempts or something. And they beat Detroit with Baker throwing the ball 16 times.
Yeah. He had a really good team. And he threw it more in the first week when they won as well.
Yeah.
Real quick, and you mentioned the Steelers offense and George Pickens. I want to finish up with this question quickly. Josh, the Jerry Rice of question askers, as he is sometimes known, says, George Pickens, Drake London, Garrett Wilson, when do we stop waiting for these guys to break out and just accept that they are mid-tier wide receiver 2s on our fantasy rosters and better in real life football than fantasy? And I'm glad he added the second part to that because that's a very important distinction because, Garrett Wilson and George Pickens have already broken out. It's just their offenses and the way things have gone for them. They're not the stalwarts on your fantasy team that maybe they should be. And it's funny because you want, like I mentioned, Jordan Whittington with the Rams. I love picking him up because I want the guy that's going to play the Cooper Kupp role. I don't even need it to be Cooper Kupp. When Cooper Nakua was doing it, that's a fantasy option. And those players might not be as good as talented as Garrett Wilson or George Pickens, but when you're playing fantasy, you want the opportunity more so than you even want the great players. And I think Garrett Wilson and George Pickens, who are both on my fantasy team, by the way, this year, are good examples of me like looking at awesome players and be like, yes, the breakout's going to come. And George Pickens looks really good on Sunday, but he still only has 2 catches for 30 yards.
Yeah. And the short answer to the question, including London and Olave, is I'm buying all those guys. I'm still investing heavy in every one of them. They're all really, really good players. Their situations aren't terrible. They'll be fine. 2 weeks.
They'll be fine. They're good.
Passings are down. Passing
fantasy is goofy. Don't judge how good a player is by his fantasy points. It's probably the best thing. And Josh said that in his answer. They're better real life football players than they are for fantasy leagues right now. Thanks everybody for making us your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you subscribe to our show and any number of the 200 podcasts right here on the network. Matt and I back tomorrow. Peacock and Williamson.